We want to welcome back a returning guest, Richard Cohen, who joined us last year as we were getting this thing going. We were very appreciative to have him on to basically tell us what the heck we were supposed to expect when it came to everything WNBA, really. But this time, we're going to talk specifically about the expansion draft. And for our podcast, the fans are very interested in the 5 that the Valkyries are going to protect. And Richard wrote a piece on her hoop stats just recently, and he gave his predictions. And I've seen some wild predictions in our YouTube comments about who should be protected. So we'll talk to Richard about that. But first of all, Richard, how are you doing?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm looking forward to Friday, seeing what actually happens compared to my guesses, which, I wasn't all that close last year in the end. So it'd be interesting to see what Toronto and Portland
I
decide
think
to
I,
go
I
with.
think I messaged you on Blue Sky, but I think you got Burton. Did you get
I
Burton
definitely
last year?
got Burton. Yeah, I felt like
I
that one was
mean,
pretty
there
clear
you
because
go. That makes it all
Connecticut
up
had
right there.
7 players, so
Yeah,
whichever one they left available was going to be the one the Valkyries took. But
it
yeah,
doesn't
then,
matter
then
the
it
rest
kind
of
of
the guesses.
devolved because your
Yeah,
team went off book compared to what most of us thought they were going to do.
right.
Brian and I talk about this at the end of last season, which was fans have fallen in love with so many players. And we were just, basically telling folks like, hey, we're probably going to lose a couple of these players possibly. So, even though you do love them, this is a business. Like, get ready. This expansion draft is going to be really interesting. And so, when you fall in love with certain players, other teams may fall in love with them too. So that makes this really interesting because the Valkyries 1 year into their franchise were very beloved, great fan base, great attendance. They did well. They made the playoffs. So this year 2, it's like bang, right at the beginning of year 2 is the expansion draft, and the team changes immediately. So you made some predictions, and we'll get to your list right now of who you thought the Valkyries should protect. And then we'll get Brian's thoughts and my thoughts, and I'll kind of give you some of the things that I've been seeing just from, some of the hardcore fans. But you had Veronica Burton, which is very obvious. You had Yuste Yotsite, who has not even come over yet. She was drafted last year, but she's coming over this year. Janelle Salon, Ileana Rupert, and the one that I'm seeing the most divisiveness about is
Yeah.
Carla Late.
Yeah,
And
that
what
fifth
was
spot is
your
definitely debatable.
what's your methodology in who you thought the Valkyries should protect?
Well, the first 3 you mentioned are young, talented, and still getting better. Yeah, you wouldn't. I unless you've got concerns about Salon and Repair showing up in the future, and hopefully with the increased money coming into the league, that's going to be less of an issue going forwards because you would think the international players are going to be even more interested in playing in the WNBA in future now that they're going to get paid a lot more. So yeah, I think Repair and Salon alongside the obvious Burton are pretty easy. Yosite has had a good season overseas. She still looks worth protecting to me. I know obviously you guys haven't seen her, so the fans haven't developed that relationship that you were talking about with that they have with a lot of the people who they do know. But she was drafted so high, it would be a surprise to see the Valkyries be willing to let her go unless they have very good reason to, and yeah, really feel that they can't. And but then yeah, that fifth spot, I I am happy to concede that there are arguments to leave Late available and protect. I would understand Zandalasini. I would understand Thornton. Anyone else, I think, is probably a little bit of a reach, but either of those two in the fifth spot, I think, would be somewhat reasonable.
Bri, where do you sit on the Late and Zandalasini argument?
Yeah, I mean, I think those are the two. I think, and for fans who maybe aren't as familiar with how the expansion draft works and they're saying, "Wait, like Kayla Thornton was an all-star last year. Like why is she available?" And it's because just like the Valkyries last year, they're only allowed to select one unrestricted free agent. And the thought is that maybe Kayla isn't one of the top unrestricted free agents that are going to be available, and if both teams only get to select one, then maybe she's not one of the ones. And so, with Carla still on that, second year of a rookie deal, and Zandalicini, is she 27 and played really well last year for the Valkyries when they needed her. When Kayla went down, uh, she had to step up and be like a primary creator and initiator in some like fans can point to. She took the last shot of the entire Valkyries season. That was a play drawn up for her too. It looked like. So I think I too might be close to like a flip of the coin, and we have some people in our Discord who are a little lower on Carla, and I kind of feel like for Carla to take the next step, it is that 3-point shot probably developing, which kind of feels like it hasn't. Just looking at stats, I haven't watched as much of a European season in the Spanish league, but it feels like maybe that still has been more of a struggle. But I still trust her. Like I remember games last year. I went to the Vegas game in Vegas during the NBA Summer League, where it felt like they couldn't really get anything in chunks of the game. But when Carla got in the game, she was forcing the issue and just taking it to the hole. Whether it went in or not, she was getting to the line. It's just some people you need to force the issue, and I feel like Carla was pretty good at that when they needed her to be. So I think it's still a really tough decision, and that kind of honestly brings me into one of my first questions for Richard, which is, which teams do you think will have the hardest decisions to make? And I imagine the Valkyries are one of them.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the teams that have a lot of players who are worth protecting, which is teams like New York have a long list of options. Dallas, despite how bad they were last season, have the rights to a lot of at least either good players or players with potential going forwards because they're young enough that they're still going to get better. And then, yeah, the easier ones, or at least the ones where you're not that worried, are the ones with only sort of 5 or 6 players where you're actually that worried about whether you'd lose them or not. Because there might be players on the end of the roster, but if they haven't shown that much in the league already, then in some cases you're protecting other people ahead of them because you're not that worried about losing them. So yeah, I think it's teams like New York in particular who have a long list where you're most concerned, but then at least you're only losing 2. That's why you have the big list. You try and build up that depth like they did before even Golden State were picking. They had people like Kennedy Burke in reserve, so that losing Kayla Thornton, they had cover behind that in that case. So yeah, it's they might lose people, and then they might end up giving up the better players in the expansion draft, but they've also got more cover than a lot of other teams.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I saw your list for them, and I was just like, whoa, they really do just have like a pretty deep talent pool, specifically New York, and just like interesting players that I've gotten to watch, whether it be in Eurobasket with like Raquel Carrera. I was like, okay, that's like a talented player that they just have the rights to. But I guess kind of going back, I thought about the Kayla Thornton thing a little more, and I was wondering your thoughts on this. Is that in the Valkyries expansion draft, the thought process was whoever they pick from unrestricted free agency or from their unrestricted free agent pick, they only got one. Whoever they picked, they would have to core that player, and they ended up choosing Monique Billings, and they did not core her. They went into the offseason and just negotiated like a 1-year deal.
Yep.
And I guess that kind of does bring up the question of like, could that potentially happen with Kayla Thornton? Because you think of the 2 franchises, one being Portland, and Vanya Cernovich runs the team as the general manager, who was a part of the Golden State Valkyries organization. And then you think of the Toronto Tempo with Sandy Brondello as the head coach, who also has familiarity with Kayla Thornton. I kind of wonder, like, is this more of a because I think most of the mocks I've seen is either that 5th protection goes to Carla or Chechi. And I do wonder if like there could be something there with, even if they don't core Kayla, could they take it to the offseason and do what they did with Monique?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly possible because obviously one of the things that comes with the core designation is that Supermax 1-year offer. And do you want to give that much cash to one player, especially potentially a player of Kayla Thornton's level, which is good but not a superstar? So I mean, it's in this new CBA, we're looking at a supermax salary that's 20% of the cap, which is significantly more than it was last year when it was around 16 and a half. And most players weren't even taking that. If you look at players like Asia Wilson and Brianna Stewart were actively taking less than that so that their teams could build the roster. If you actually take that step up to 20%, that makes negotiating and finding enough room to sign everyone else that you want on the rest of the roster increasingly difficult. So, yeah, whether you would want to call someone like Thornton, even if you do protect them, that's a separate question. But yeah, you're going to see teams making difficult decisions about both whether to protect people and whether to call them, and it's not necessarily the same decision. Sometimes you're just protecting them to make sure they can't be taken by the expansion team, not necessarily so that you're then going to call them yourself, even if they are an unrestricted free agent either way.
The one thing about the Chechi argument is she's very slow-footed on defense. And while she has a fantastic shot, like she has a great looking shot, and you're pretty confident when she shoots it that it's going to go in. And I think there's a trust that the fans kind of built up with her going like, I just want to see her shoot the basketball. It just looks so pretty when she does. But on the flip side, there is a defensive thing that we sort of started to see late where maybe she was going to get targeted a little bit. And I wonder if the idea for the Valkyries is, as great as Chechi played last year at times, lean towards the younger player. Carla, I think, is 21. It seems like Carla is a fantastic fit as far as the team morale. Not saying that I've heard anything about Chechi opposite, but it seems like Carla was like the little sister of the whole team. And I wonder if the Valkyries think that there are other players out there who they could move in to actually upgrade over Chechi. And so then you just kind of like go, hey, like, let's keep the younger player. Let's work on building up the younger player. And maybe we can find somebody to fill Chechi's spot in free agency.
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned in my article as well that there are a couple of teams in particular, you can add Golden State to that as well, where what you're planning to do in free agency definitely has a big impact on who you want to protect. The plans that you've got for the current roster and for who you want to chase as a free agent has to come into the thinking, because if you're LA, then do you want to move on from some of the roster that only finished 500 last year, or are you really trying to keep the whole core together and when you have to pay them more? So I came on your podcast last year and suggested they should go young with all of the picks in the expansion draft. So I can hardly argue against going young with protection for this year as well. Yeah.
I want to say I was totally with you on that last year, and it was a nice surprise that the Valkyries ended up kind of over, like, doing better than my expectation and competing. I feel like it kind of like set the culture.
Young, to be fair.
Yeah. And even thinking about these new expansion teams, it's like Vanya was a part of that Valkyries, system, and now is going to Portland. So you'd think maybe Portland does a little bit of that Valkyrie stuff, but then you have Sandy Brondello coaching in Toronto, where it's like you're not going to put Sandy Brondello to like develop you're not going to hire her, I feel like, to like develop, I guess. I feel like she's a winning coach, but so I guess we'll see with what directions those teams take, especially with like this, the Juju-led draft class coming in. You'd think teams would maybe want to tank for Juju. But I think going back to your like expansion draft piece, and one of my next questions was, I guess, kind of a two-parter, where it's, who do you expect, I guess, out of the people that you protected and left unprotected, who was the best player left unprotected? And then the second question is, I'm sure you were teetering on a few names. Who do you think could be like the biggest shocker left unprotected? Either that you protected or didn't.
Well, technically, the best player I left unprotected was Brianna Stewart.
True, we can't.
But I mean, that was a sort of calculated decision on the basis of her understanding how this all works, and like, you would expect the other teams to pass on her, and you would expect that even if they took her, there's a good chance she would go back to New York anyway, because
Did you see her comments today?
yeah, she's basically said she's re-signing in New York, but then she might have gotten the nod from Kolb that she's also being protected. So yeah, we'll see how that plays out. The one name I mentioned in that article, I did protect. She's on my protected list, but I did point out that it's not 100% certainty. Was Arike Ogunbowale. I can see Dallas moving on from her and trying to turn the team over to Paige and to whoever they take at the top of this year's draft, and trying to move on from Ogunbowale and become a different kind of team, because Arike kind of forces you to play a certain way, or at least for part of the game play a certain way, because she's going to want to get her shots and take over the ball on occasion. But I had them protecting her and then probably coring her to try and turn that into value, because they'd still see there being trade value there. If they've talked to teams and don't think there's much trade value to be gotten there, then maybe they could leave her unprotected, and that'd be a hell of a big name for Portland or Toronto to try and sell their franchise on if she was there.
That feels like that's like the winner of getting the first pick of the expansion draft, because was it like Toronto that won the coin toss and they elected to pick 6th in the college draft, so then Portland gets first in the expansion draft, and yeah, that would be like the crown jewel. That'd be like, oh, you probably should have taken first in the expansion draft potentially. But yeah, because I feel like you kind of presented an argument in the expansion draft piece that I'm just like, I think she'll be protected because of the argument you presented, where it's like they won't feel like they won't want to lose her for nothing. You know, I feel like you could still maybe get something for a player like her. And so, well, yeah, I mean, we'll see. But I almost like the argument you presented in that for Arike. I feel like I even saw some crazy ones today too, but kind of I had some questions about like specifically like the international players, like the European players, the Australian players, in that, you know, with the new CBA, with the increased salaries. I feel like Emma Miesemann has been someone I feel like I've seen you talk a lot about on Blue Sky from time to time, who, you know, took what was it, like a 2 or 3 year gap from like 2021 or 2022 until like she most recently joined with the New York Liberty. I wanted to get your thoughts on if the new increase in salary, it jumping from the number it did to the number it is now, if someone like her is maybe expected to like just finish out her career in the WNBA because of this increased amount, or do you think there's still potential that she might not play in the W?
I mean, I think there has to be some question on whether she would or not, because she's played 2 seasons out of the last 5. So, and even that was only half a season last year. So even with the increased money coming in, I think there has to be some question on whether she's that interested. I imagine she's very well paid to play for Fenerbahce, so
True.
she won't exactly be hurting for cash. But that would be a worthwhile name to take. Again, she was left unprotected, but that's partly because of the number of people that New York have to consider on their list, and partly because of that worry about whether she would show up. Also because of what we talked about with the age of various players, that she's 33. She's still very, very good, but you don't know how many years there would be left there. So maybe teams think they can find someone who would have more time left on their clock to play with. But if she's available, and I don't know how much sort of the expansion teams would have got hold of these lists and then been able to make some phone calls. Hopefully they've had the time to do that and find out whether someone like Miesemann would be interested in playing for Toronto or for Portland. Because obviously in some cases, you know, this is the case with someone like Stewart as well. These players aren't going to want to play for an expansion team unless that expansion team is going to go out and make a massive splash in free agency as well to try and build an immediate contender around them. Some players will be tempted by that extra cash. You know, if the team wants to offer them the supermax, then $1.4 million is more money than some of these players have ever seen. So they'll be interested in taking that. But I think someone who's made quite a bit of money over their career, especially overseas rather than in the US, someone like Stewart, someone like, you know, Alyssa Thomas, or whoever, those level of players probably don't want to play for an expansion team. So that then that affects your thinking in terms of who you're going to take in a draft like this, because what's the point unless you think there's immediate significant trade value just moving the player straight onto someone else? There's not much point in taking a player who won't want to come.
Going back to the Breanna Stewart comment from today, she basically said she's coming back. I think Sabrina said the same thing, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Asia, I think similarly, I think people think like he's done deal. She's going back as well. Do you think this free agent period, which everyone was specifically wanting to be a free agent, knowing that the CBA was going to be up, thus we have this possibility of movement, but I do wonder if any of the big pieces are going to move. I know Brian has a Jackie Young dream for Golden State, but like it just seems like the way that things are going to work out is most of the very, very valuable players are going to end up staying put. Or is that based on, you know, the team and kind of where those teams are?
I mean, it's definitely possible that a lot of them will re-sign, but I will tell you that we do, or at least we have in previous years, done a mock off-season podcast over at Her Hoop Stats, where we sort of play out as if we were the GMs of each team. And what usually happens is real life ends up being crazier than we managed to come up with in our mock off-season. We don't manage to match the kind of moves that end up happening in reality. They've shrunk the off season so much by how long it took them to get the CBA done that you do wonder if that's going to sort of limit how much jumping around we see. Maybe people think I'll take a short deal somewhere where I'm comfortable, and then in a year or two I'll go through the whole free agency process where I get to like be wooed by all the other teams and take visits all around the country and see how much they can tempt me, because there's not really going to be a lot of time for that. There's probably going to be a lot of video calls and things like that going on in this free agency period, because you're going to have to decide fast, because teams are going to have to sign people quickly and make decisions quickly, and that's going to move on to the players as well, because if you don't sign, then they might move on to the next person on their list, and then the money's gone and you got to go somewhere else instead.
Go ahead, Brian.
I think some of like the last questions I have kind of build off of the first question with Misamin, and I kind of feel like I feel like there's just going to regardless be uncertainty, but I guess I still wanted to get your kind of takes on, you know, a player like we already mentioned her in this podcast, but like a player like Raquel Carrera, who was, you know, drafted in previous years and hasn't yet come to the WNBA. I think there's a couple like and even some like an Awak Queer, right, where she came and then, you know, went to has not come back for past couple of years. I just wonder, you know, I feel like the change in salary is like, you know, you're going from what, a $60,000 to $70,000 rookie contract to maybe like, you know, those same players might be making $300,000 next year. Like that, I feel like that's just like a 5x or whatever that is. And I just wonder, like, if it's more likely that we'll start to see some of these international players, whether it even be a Raquel Carrera who was drafted in 2021, has yet to report, or even someone like, you know, how Janelle Salon went undrafted and just signed with the Valkyries last year. Like, I feel like there's also a lot of players like that. And you know the last names better than I do, but isn't there like a Pauline French player like Astier?
SDA, yeah.
Has she been drafted?
No, she went undrafted, so she
went undrafted. Like, yeah, there's like a lot of examples like that. The Spanish player, like Elena Buenavida, I think she's a young player too. Like, I just wonder if some of those players, and by all means, like they don't have like a for sure spot on a WNBA roster. Like, I don't know if there's many players that have that just like for sure roster spot outside of like a Misamin from over there. But I just wonder, like, are they going to start expressing a lot of interest in the WNBA? Players who have never reported before, got drafted a while ago, or even players who went undrafted and maybe looking to inquire about, you know, see if there's a chance to sign with the team. Does that just feel like much more likely, or just a little bit more likely? Like, do you think we'll see that a lot more, or just a little more?
It's definitely going to happen. I mean, especially with more teams coming into the league, because those additional players have got to come from somewhere, and it's not just going to be, you know, these second and third round picks, players sort of who didn't quite make the league out of college that, your favorite player who came from wherever state that didn't make it as a pro and has been playing in Sweden or wherever instead for the last 2 years might now have a shot. But yeah, I think the European international players are going to be more interested inevitably because there's more cash now. I think obviously what the WNBA would like to be at some point in the future is like the NBA. They would like to be the top global league that is the destination for every player on the planet.
Right.
And if you get to that level, then players grow up in Spain wanting to play in the WNBA. They don't grow up wanting to play in the Spanish Women's League. And yeah, and then it becomes a question of whether they play in the WNBA off season at all. Where obviously we've got things like Unrivaled and the Project B League that's starting up as well. For now, I think players are going to want to play in those as well. But the more money that comes into the WNBA, the more they extend the season and start offering reasons for why you shouldn't play anywhere else, including the cash, then the WNBA becomes the destination league if they get that far. But yeah, I do think we could see a lot more international players because to a certain extent, that's still one of the sort of the places you can outflank other teams in the league. It's where there's still an imbalance if you manage to look at players that other teams don't even realize exist, because everyone's watching March Madness. Everyone sees if some player stands out for Virginia or whatever, but not necessarily everyone's watching some game between Valencia and Girona on a Tuesday night in Spain. So yeah, there's still options there and players to find that other teams, despite the fact that we know their names exist, I guarantee you there are GMs in this league that barely know some of the players that you just mentioned are playing basketball anywhere.
You know what I just realized is they're trying to get to, is it 18 in the next
By 2030.
several years?
Yeah, and we've got whatever's going to happen in Boston now that Connecticut are on the way out as well.
I just realized we're gonna have these Valkyries expansion draft protections conversations for the next several years.
Yeah, you get 1
Auto
year off
invite.
next year and then 3 more consecutive ones as long as all the expansion teams show up on time. Yeah.
Don't get too close to these fringe players. I'm just kidding. Get as close as you want. Just understand that it is a business. How closely are you following the March Madness stuff as the Final Four is upcoming this weekend?
Yeah, I've been watching a fair bit of it. I don't watch much during the season, but once March Madness is on, and this year all of the games are pretty easily accessible over here. But we've actually got 2 different streaming services showing them rather than none, as has been the case in some previous years. So yeah, I've been watching, but yeah, I don't pay an awful lot of attention to college outside of the top few players that you obviously become acquainted with. I've been waiting for Olivia Miles to declare for the draft for 2-3 seasons at this point.
Yeah. I had a question off of that too. Oh, sorry, you go.
No, go for it.
I was just gonna say, well, I think most draft analysts who I've been following kind of just have the Valkyries going the "you stay" route again, and essentially just like drafting overseas a French player named Nell Angloma. Are you familiar with that player at all?
She kind of exploded onto the scene mostly this season. She wasn't even in people that sort of pay attention to the overseas leagues weren't really touting her that highly until this season, when she's had a really good year and got onto lots of draft boards. I could see that happening given what we've seen from your front office in the past. Yeah, but you never know. I mean, when you're drafting at 8, that sometimes someone drops to that sort of area in the draft. So, if someone like Lauren Betts could still be on the board at that point,
That would be crazy, yeah.
But sometimes that's the sort of area where someone unexpected is still there. So yeah, if they ended up with an American, I wouldn't be that surprised. But yeah, Angloma's interesting, and yeah, obviously the advantage that you still get with some of these international players, assuming we've got no changes in the rules in the CBA that none of us have seen yet, is that most of them are significantly younger than the players that are coming out of college. So you're talking about drafting players who are either 19 or 20. So there's more development still to come. than there might be for someone who's coming out of college at 23, where a lot of it may have already happened. You may have seen pretty much what they're going to be already.
I think, and my last question, kind of going back to the expansion draft, is I think we're probably all in agreement that, the Valkyries' tough decision comes down to that 5th protection spot. And whoever is left unprotected out of Carla and Chechi is going to be drafted in the expansion draft. And I was listening to the Her Hoops podcast today that you were on. And one of your co-hosts actually went with Amihir as the 2nd selection from the Valkyries. Do you maybe have, who do you think could potentially be that 2nd selection? Because you would still have, Kayla available, Amihir, Kate Martin, Caitlin Chen, a couple more players going down that list. But I guess I bring this up because I was a little surprised to hear the Amihir selection, but not really, because I do think she's a really talented player. But I think I was just expecting probably Kate, just for Kate Martin to get taken again.
Yeah, I mean, there'll be appeal to Martin, partly because of, she sells tickets or draws interest at a bare minimum, whether you think she's that valuable on the court or not. I could believe Amy here going, because coaches and GMs fall in love with players like that who have these physical tools that you can't teach. And then whatever you may have seen on the court, and I'm not saying that she's shown that she has some skills, but you don't necessarily have to have shown those skills, because people think they can teach those on top of the physical abilities. You can't teach the physicals. So those players tend to get multiple chances. And she had flashes last season for you guys. So yeah, I could believe Amy here, but I think you mentioned the ones that are most likely to go. It's her, maybe Martin, and then late if she was left unprotected, or I guess there's some chance Rupert would be left unprotected. But yeah, and if an unrestricted free agent goes from you guys, it surely has to be Thornton. I would be very surprised if Fagbenle, Billings, or at this point in her career, even Tiffany Hayes was taken as a UFA pick, really, because Hayes feels like at this point she plays so aggressive and she throws herself into everybody and to the floor so constantly that you just feel like she's not going to stay in one piece anymore at this
She
stage
missed a lot
career.
of time last year, especially when they needed her the most. She didn't even play a game in that Minnesota series because of that.
Yeah, so I think that's probably unlikely. So yeah, it's the young players and Chechi, I think, really are the main players you may have to get prepared to lose.
I mentioned that Xanda Lucini has one of the prettiest jumpers. Amihir's is the opposite of that, one of the ugliest jumpers, but at the same time, you see her as somebody who's so athletic, who plays hard, who's got a little bit of anger, but not in a negative way, just a little bit of a ferociousness to her game sometimes as well. And
you want that little edge from somebody on the roster.
Yeah, for sure. And she showed that at in spades too. And then I think she didn't even make the team coming out of camp, right? They added her after the fact. So that's a great story for someone who just didn't give up and kept fighting and made that team. Richard, this has been fantastic. And Brian, whenever he and I are chatting about something, there's a few people who he will go to see their opinion on said thing, and yours is often one of those. So that's how much we value your takes and your analysis and your writing. And yeah, really appreciate you doing this again. And I think people know by now, herhoopsstats.com. And you're also on Blue Sky. You're very active on Blue Sky as one of the top women's basketball. What do they call them? Blue Skyers? They're not accounts, Blue Sky accounts, whatever
BSers.
BSers.
Twitter exiles. Yeah, I think most of us are over there because we decided we didn't fancy hanging out on X anymore.
Yeah. So anything else you want to plug before we get out of here?
No, I think that's about it at the moment. Yeah, anything I write will come out on the Her Hoop Stats newsletter, and yeah, I'll be on the podcast that we we put out on a fairly regular basis. A lot more now that we'll be getting back into the WNBA season rather than college.
Yeah, I will say really quick there, just to kind of plug something for you, is that if people haven't read it yet, we kind of talked a little bit pre-pod about how, these kind of rules for the expansion draft are a little hard to follow. And, even some people who, are in the business are even a little confused about, these rules. And I feel like in your piece that's on the Her Hoop Stats newsletter on Substack, it's probably the most like comprehensive, has all the rules listed, and then has, which other, most pieces that I've seen also have everyone's contract designation next to their names, as well as who you're protecting, who you're leaving unprotected. So it's the most comprehensive draft, mock draft, expansion draft piece by far. So I definitely think everyone should check that out for sure.
Yeah, all those designations come from our cap sheets at Her Hoop Stats. So yeah, it's nice that we've got that these days, because I remember I've been around this stuff long enough trying to do an expansion draft preview for Atlanta back in 2008. And we didn't have any of this information back then. So it was guesswork based on who the hell was on the roster at the end of the season.
All right. Thanks, Richard.